So the acceptance phase, the very first phase. Initial age range, this is kind of the range that happens in that kind of birth to childhood, right? 10, 11 years old, somewhere in there. And Satan's strategy in this initial phase is just to use our God-given hardwiring against us, right? We're hardwired mentally, spiritually, even physically, right, to respond to a dad's voice. That's how we're designed. And so if Satan can introduce into that model, that design, damage, so that we think, well, all dads are like this. He starts to pervert our definition of what father means. Instead of father being good, loving, true, committed to, all the things that God is, right? If he can pervert that, because we have one definition of father, we don't have two. We don't go, dad's like this and father's like that, right? In our brains at that age, we have one definition of father. So if he can get in and pervert that so that we accept that father means I'm unloved. Father means I'm abandoned. Father means, fill in the blank, right? So acceptance, right? He wants us to accept that, he's taken that our God-given hardwiring trust in a dad and using it against us, right? And so the goal is just, again, to establish that foundation. So that ultimately we don't look to a father, a true father, for the core questions of our heart, right? We think we have to provide them or we got to go find them somewhere else, right? So establish that foundation. And so in childhood, this is where the first parts of that damage cycle to happen, the biggest ones, right? We've used the example of divorce, right? When young kids go through divorce, the damage that happens with them, all the messages they hear, all the ways they assume it must be me, what did I do, all that stuff. Those are so big there because they don't have both the biology, right, to understand. When you're in that childhood stage, that childhood range, everything's about you. Your world is this big. There's no other options, right? Something bad happens. There's only a couple people to look to, right? And so, again, that childhood is where the biggest pieces of that damage take place. And we've talked about those in the last few sessions, right? But that's where this MO, this foundation layer gets really laid and concreted in. We were talking just a little bit before the session, right? I'm not going to guess your age, and don't tell me what it is, but I'm assuming you're over 30, as I am, right? And you go, when you get 30 and 40 and 50 and 60, you start going, how does that still bother me? How does that still affect me? That happened when I was 7. Well, it's because both biologically as well as spiritually, that is such a foundational time, right? And so if things can get marred, if things can get broken, if things can get hit there, it is a lifelong journey to right that ship, right? I often go back to the example of the Titanic. If the Titanic, when it set, now for those of you that don't know the Titanic, it's a huge ship that said it was going to be unsinkable, right? And it hit an iceberg. And this is back in 1920, 30, that time period, right? Hit an iceberg, sunk, almost everybody died except for, maybe 25%. Anyway, if the Titanic would have adjusted its rudder 1%, actually even less than 1%, when it set sail, it would have been, I think the estimate was 150 miles from the iceberg, right? So you don't think the enemy knows if he can, even just 1% hit you back then, and he doesn't care you're little. He does not care. In fact, again, I have said this before, look at abortion stats if you want to know how much the enemy cares about playing fair, right? He doesn't care, right? So if he can hit you early, even just a little bit, the course of your life without intervention from God is going to be way off course. All right. So, and again, to talk about how even like I said, our biology. There's a psychological state called cognitive equilibrium. Okay, and how we think. So I'm going to put this quote up, and it's kind of long, but it says, individuals naturally seek equilibrium, and this is a biological, psychological phenomenon, right? Because disequilibrium, which is a mismatch between one's way of thinking and one's environment, is inherently dissatisfying. When individuals encounter new discrepant information, they enter into a state of disequilibrium. And in order to return to a state of equilibrium, they have to either ignore the information or have to somehow attempt to manage it, right? And so this really plays out for us, especially at those young ages. If you look at, and you can really see it in infants, right? And in fact, I think when Jesus said we have to become like little children to enter the kingdom of God, one of the things that little children you don't have to teach them to do is trust their parent. Right? They come out of the womb and go, Mommy, Daddy, feed me, protect me. I trust you, right? That's at the core of being a little child. And so I think that as we age, that kind of that inner thing to know we're supposed to matter. We're supposed to be loved and valued. There's something inert in us, internal in us, I should say, internal in us, that we know that's the case. So when we get into a situation when we're 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, where we go, that happened, Mommy, Daddy get divorced, or someone commits suicide, or, right, we know, even if we can't explain it as children with language, we know it's wrong, it's off, it's something, and it creates this I can't even say the word, disequilibrium, right? And as kids, all we can do is either ignore it or try to incorporate it, right? And as kids, how we incorporate it is that we make it about ourselves. That's the only thing that makes sense, right? That's why little kids go, what did I do? And even if you give an answer, somewhere in their mind, in their heart, they're still going, yeah, it was probably me, which isn't true. But so we naturally, again, so Satan uses our normal biology, our normal hardwiring against us because and one reason is because of this cognitive equilibrium. All right, so acceptance phase, Satan's trying to convince us that living fatherless is normal, and that preps us for the next phase, which is the depression phase. Depression phase. So depression phase, and I want to state, this is not about emotional sadness, right? We think about depression, we think about kind of our modern use of depression, right, as emotional sadness or despondency. But this is more that a resignation, that this is what life is, right? This is as good as it gets. There's no escaping it. So typically happens kind of the preteen to mid-teen range. And the strategy is just to suppress our heart's desire for core answers, right? It's that point where we are cognitively developed enough that, and you see this if you know teenagers, you see this happening in them, right? Where suddenly the little kid starts to get cynical or starts to get like, something starts to turn in them because they start to realize, oh, this is how life is. It's not Christmas mornings and wonderful things if they've had that as a kid, right? They start to realize life is tough, life is hard, things happen, things I don't like happen, things have happened to me or whatever. And so they start to go, I just don't want this pain, right? They start to push it down, suppress it. And his goal is resignation, right? That this is as good as my life is going to get. So it's almost like a body's immune system where, your body's immune system isn't sad, it's just suppressed, it's compromised, right? There's if you guys know the Narnia series, there's at the very beginning of the first book in the series, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a scene in there where in Narnia, all the creatures are in this, I would call it this depressed state because they go, it's always winter, never Christmas, right? They just come to expect, this is it. This is it. That's a great picture in my mind of how this this phase is. This is where this is a phase where you see the most suicides in kids, right? Because they're convinced this is it. It ain't getting no better, right? 13, 14, 15, 16. Unfortunately, the age is getting younger and younger and younger, which is terrifying and evil. And you see a lot of suicides in this phase, at the first time around at least, right? So, Satan's goal is just to kind of get your resignation. I guarantee his goal is to actually have you just get rid of yourself, right? If you don't, it's because you have some glimmer of hope, right? That, okay, maybe it could get better. And that really leads into the next phase, which is the bargaining phase. So bargaining phase, again, late teens, and these are rough, right? Depending on the maturity level, it could be later, it could be earlier, right? But bargaining phase, typically on average, late teens to mid-20s. And the strategy is to lure us with those adult answers, right? Now I got a career, now I've got an education, now I can buy a car, now I can do this, now I can do that, right? Looking for those adult versions to serve as answers. So, career, money, status, sex, religion, gangs, social identity, dozens of others, right? It just could be anything. Those adult pursuits. And the strategy, the agreement goal is you can get your identity, your value, calling, if you can earn it, if you can perform for it. So this phase is all about performance, 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 right? If you just do the right thing for the right people at the right time, they're going to tell you. So it is a return to kind of those non-negotiable heart core questions, but thinking we can provide the answers through those adult pursuits. Just a different way you can get those things. So it's very transactional, and it also means we're in control, right? Because one of the things that childhood talks about, or kind of leads us to the point, is where we realize we're not in control, right? My parents, and again, we don't necessarily say this or think this consciously, but we didn't get it from our parents necessarily. We're not getting it. We're looking at the world and the idealism that you have in your teens, right? You look at the world and go, there shouldn't be any war, and there's war. There shouldn't be people, starving, and there's people starving. You look at all the world and you go, okay, I can't control that. So this is a way to really return to, I can control these things now. These core questions, I can get the answers. I can control. I can act a certain way. And so it's very transactional. We're really focused on what we can get from others versus what we can give, right? It's very transactional. And even in our relationship with God, a lot of times people get stuck in this phase too. It's very transactional. I follow God because he can do this for me, And if he doesn't do this for me, then, well, maybe that's not such a good deal for me, that kind of thing. And, I'll go back to my example with Gary, a very transactional, it creates this unspoken agreement, right? I'll act this way if you act that way, right? And if the other person doesn't act that way back, then that gives me permission to go, I'm done with you, right? This is why a lot of marriages get in trouble this first, I always talk about the 7-year, the 7-year window. It's because a lot of people get married in their 20s, and they're in this phase, right? If I treat you this way, you got to treat me that way. Oh, you didn't treat me that way? Well, I'm done with you. I'm going to find somebody that does, right? And a lot of marriages end in this phase. Ultimately, this is exhausting. Ultimately, it is, because it's kind of, I say if phase 2, depression, is kind of drowning, phase 3 is treading water, If you saw that movie, Finding Nemo, that Disney movie way back, the one fish that was looking was always like, just keep swimming, Dory, right? This is the just keep swimming phase, right? Just keep trying. Well, it's not this job, it's that job. It's not this car, it's that car. It's not this wife, it's that wife. It's not this husband, it's that husband. It's not this promotion, it's the next one, right? It's not this group, it's that group. It's always going to be something else, because when you get the thing that you were bargaining for, that you thought was finally going to bring you, answers, right? And it doesn't, well, you don't go, well, it's where I'm looking for it. No, you just didn't look hard enough, or you didn't try hard enough, or you didn't go to the right group, or you're not identifying with the right thing, or you didn't say the right thing, right? Again, we can all think of examples of our own lives or others we watch that they go, yeah, I thought this was going to do it, right? I thought if I just got a little more money, or if I just got that cool coat, or I just got that girlfriend or that boyfriend or that husband or that wife or that house or that whatever, right? We fill it with a million things. We just keep trying. But at some point, we realize it just doesn't work. And that pushes us into the anger phase.